It is 98 degrees outside. Your air conditioner has been running for 6 hours straight and it is still losing. You can hear it, that low grind out on the side of the house, working itself to death, and at the end of the month it is going to hand you a bill that makes you wince. Most people think that is just the price of staying cool in the summer. It is not. It is the price of forgetting. Because there was a time in this country when a house stayed cool through the worst heat of August with no compressor, no motor, no electric bill, and in some cases, no electricity at all. It worked. It worked for decades. And then, almost overnight, it disappeared from American homes. Not because it stopped working, but because somebody figured out they could sell you something else. I am going to show you what they made you forget. Some of it is history you were never taught. And the last part of it is something you can actually do this weekend in the house you already own to drop a room 10-15 degrees with no power at all. Stay with me, because once you see how simple the physics really is, you are going to be a little angry that nobody ever told you. Let me start with the thing that sounds impossible, because it is the hook that pulls the whole story loose. You can make cold out of heat. I know how that sounds. Heat is the enemy of cold. But it turns out that a flame, a small, steady flame, can drive a cooling machine just as well as an electric motor can. No compressor, no moving parts to wear out, just heat pushing a chemical around a sealed loop and the loop pulling warmth out of the air. This is not a theory. This is a machine that existed, sat in American kitchens, and kept food cold for years at a time. They called it absorption cooling. And where I come from, thinking about power the way you have to when the grid is not a thing you can count on. This is exactly the kind of idea that never dies, because it does not depend on anyone else. It depends on physics, and physics does not send you a bill. Here is the part of the story that got buried. Back in the years before electric lines reached most of the country, if you lived out past the towns, you did not have a power company to plug into. So the question was simple and serious. How do you keep food from spoiling in the summer with no electricity? And the answer people landed on was beautiful. A sealed device, a small heat source, and a refrigerant that moved through the system on heat alone. One version was a heavy iron ball you warmed up once a day. Warm it in the morning, and it kept a cold box cold for the next 24 hours. No motor, no noise, no wire running to the wall. Then it got better. Companies built silent refrigerators that ran on a tiny gas flame, no electricity at all, and they ran for decades. Some of those units are still running today, right now, in cabins and off-grid homes, machines built before your grandparents were born, still quietly doing their job because there was nothing inside them to break. And here is the detail that stops people cold when they hear it. One of the men who worked on this idea, trying to build a cooling machine with no moving parts, was Albert Einstein. Him and a colleague filed patents on it around 1930. A refrigerator with nothing inside to wear out, nothing to fail, nothing to replace. The smartest man of the century looked at how we cool things and said, we can do this with no motor at all. So let me ask you the question this whole video is built around. If the technology existed, if it worked, if it ran for decades on almost nothing, if Einstein himself put his name on a version of it, then why is there a loud, grinding, power-hungry machine bolted to the side of your house instead? The answer has almost nothing to do with science. Here is what actually happened. And it is the same story you have heard before in your bones, even if you never knew the details. A synthetic chemical came along. You have heard the name Freon, and it was owned by a partnership between two of the biggest companies in the country. And that chemical was built for a different kind of cooling, the electric, compressor-driven kind. The kind with a motor, the kind that needs to be plugged in, the kind that, once it is in your house, ties you to a power company for the rest of your life. Now think about that from their side of the table. The heat-driven machine with no moving parts, what does that sell? Almost nothing. You buy it once, it runs for 30 years, it needs no power, it needs no parts, it needs no company. There is no bill in it, there is no repeat business in it, there is nothing to sell you next month. But the electric one? The electric one needs power every single day. It needs the chemical only they made. It needs servicing. It needs replacing. It needs a grid, a utility, a monthly payment that never, ever stops. One of these machines makes somebody money every day for the rest of your life. The other one makes them money exactly once. So they spent, they outmarketed, they out-advertised, they out-muscled the quiet machine that nature basically gave away for free. And within a generation, a whole country forgot that you could ever cool a home any other way. Not because the old way failed, because the new way had a business model attached, and the old way did not. I am not telling you air conditioning is evil. On the hottest days, it saves lives, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I am telling you is this. Nobody standing between you and your electric bill has one single reason to remind you that there was ever a free alternative. So they didn't. And the silence was not an accident. It was just everybody's incentive lining up quietly against you, knowing a simple thing. Now here is where I stop telling you history and start handing you something you can use, because I can hear the practical person in you asking the right question. That is a nice story, but what do I do about my hot house this weekend? And I want to be straight with you, the way a man should be. Those old absorption machines used chemicals that are not safe to go building in your garage. I am not going to stand here and tell you to cook up something dangerous to save a few dollars. That is not the old way. The old way was never reckless. It was smart. So let me give you the part of this that is completely safe, costs almost nothing, and works on the same principle the old-timers understood, that you do not fight the heat, you outsmart it. The whole secret to cooling without power comes down to 3 things the old builders knew, and the modern ones forgot. Block the heat before it gets in. Pull the heat that is already in back out at night, and use water and air moving together to make cold you can feel. That is it. Everything else is just a version of those 3. Start with blocking it, because this is the biggest one and nobody does it. Most of the heat cooking your house is not sneaking in through the walls. It is pouring straight down through the roof and blasting in through the windows the sun hits. On a hot afternoon, an attic can climb to 140 degrees, and that oven sits right on top of your ceiling, pressing down into every room. The old way was simple. You shade the house before the sun ever touches it. You put something light-colored and reflective between the sun and your roof. You cover the windows the sun hits, from the outside, not the inside, because once the light is through the glass, the heat is already in. A shade on the outside stops it before it ever arrives. People spend a fortune fighting heat that a $2 outside shade would have stopped at the door. Then you pull out the heat that is already inside and you do it on nature's schedule, not the power companies. Here is the trick the old-timers lived by, and almost nobody does anymore. The air outside gets cool at night and it is free, so at night you open the house up. Low windows on the cool side, high windows or vents up top, and you let the cool night air pour in low while the hot, stale air escapes up high. Heat rises, you just give it a door. By dawn, you have flushed the day's heat out and filled the house with cool. Then, this is the part people miss. Right before it starts warming up, you shut everything. Close the windows, drop the shades, and seal that cool inside. You have essentially charged the house up with cold overnight and locked it in for the day. Do that faithfully, and a house can hold its cool through the worst of the afternoon without a single watt. And the third one, for when it is truly brutal, water and moving air together. Warm, dry air blowing across water pulls the heat right out of it. That is not magic. That is the same reason stepping out of a pool leaves you shivering on a hot day. The old-timers hung wet cloth in an open window and let the breeze come through it, and the air that reached them on the far side came in noticeably cooler. A damp sheet over an open window on a breezy evening. A shallow pan of water where the air moves. Air and water working together, the way they always have. It costs pennies, and on a dry, hot day you can feel the difference the moment it hits your skin. Now stand back and look at what you actually have here, because this is the part that ties all the way back to Einstein and the iron ball and the silent gas refrigerator. Every one of those old machines was built on the same idea you just learned. You do not need brute electric force to move heat around. Heat moves on its own, if you understand it. It rises. It flows from hot to cold. It gives itself up to water and to the cool of the night. All those old builders ever did was stop fighting those simple facts and start using them. They shaded before the sun struck. They breathed the house with the cool of the night. They let water carry heat away. And they stayed comfortable through summers hotter than the ones you are complaining about, with no compressor grinding away on the side of the house and no bill at the end of the month. The physics never changed, not one bit of it. What changed was who stood to profit and how much they were willing to spend to make sure you never thought about the alternative. You were sold a machine and a monthly payment, and handed back the belief that it was the only way. It never was. Let me tie off the loose ends, because a man should never hand you half a tool. Does this replace air conditioning completely? On the very worst, most humid days, in the hottest parts of the country? No, and I will not lie to you about that. But on the other 300 days a year, done right, it can mean your AC barely runs at all, and some seasons it means it does not run for weeks. That is the difference between a bill that hurts and a bill you barely notice. Does it work in a humid climate? The night flushing and the shading work everywhere. The water trick works best where the air is dry. In swampy humidity, it does less, and that is just honest physics. Know your own climate and lean on the methods that fit it. Do you need to own your home? No. A renter can shade a window from the outside, open the house at night, and hang a damp cloth in a breeze. Not one of these needs a permit, a contractor, or a single change to the building. That is the beauty of the old way. It was never about fancy equipment. It was about knowing something the people selling you equipment would rather you forgot. So here is what I want you to carry out of this. Not just the tricks, though. I want you to go use those tonight. I want you to carry the feeling of a thing being handed back to you that was quietly taken. There is a machine bolted to the side of your house that somebody convinced a whole country was the only way to stay cool. It was never the only way. The smartest people who ever lived built cooling with no motor and no bill. And it worked, and it got buried under advertising and a monthly payment. And tonight, you dug it back up. Go do the simple things. Shade the windows the sun hits from the outside. Open the house to the cool of the night and seal it at dawn. Put water where the air moves. Then come back and tell me in the comments, did anybody ever teach you that you could cool a home without electricity? Or did you think the machine on the wall was the only way, same as I once did? I read them. I want to know how many of us were kept in the dark. And if this handed you back something that felt like it was taken from you, then stay with me and subscribe, because next time I am going to show you the other half of the year. How the old builders kept a whole house warm through a hard winter with no furnace and no power bill at all, using a heat trick that is sitting right there in the walls of the house you already own. You have walked past it 100 times, just like the cold you were always able to make and were never taught how.